A notebook lies open on a table, the first page bookmarked with a pressed leaf, a pencil resting at an angle as if it has paused to breathe. The slow economy of learning begins in moments like that, not in the flash of a headline or the greedy scroll of the feed. The craft of slow learning is not glamorous. It is not the headline. It is the patient assembling of skill through repetition, correction, and modest rituals. It is the long game of mind-making, the engineering of attention and memory so that understanding grows like mycelium under the surface, rich, connected, and rarely seen at a glance. Slow learning treats knowledge as a material. It is worked, joined, measured, and preserved. It is not consumption, it is construction. The impatient model supposes that more input equals more mastery. The craft model insists otherwise. Mastery appears when practice schedules, feedback systems, and environmental supports converge. The task is to design those supports, to choose rhythms, to decide which practices will be repeated until they become the scaffolding of competence. At the neurobiological level, the brain rewards predictable contour. Neuroplasticity prefers repeated activation combined with spaced intervals. The hippocampus catalogs novelty into memory. The frontal systems bind goals to context. A single evening of study can shape a surface impression. Durable learning requires cycles of activation and consolidation. Sleep participates as an essential agent. The slow learner treats sleep not as interruption, but as a partner, because consolidation is biological and time-dependent. Short bursts of reading followed by sleep produce different outcomes than all-night cram sessions. The lesson is practical and also beautiful. Time is an ally when harnessed. Spacing is the first tool of the craft. Scientific evidence is clear. When content is reviewed intermittently, retention increases. The effect is not marginal. It scales. Revisit the same material after increasing intervals, and the memory trace strengthens and resists decay. This is not mysticism. It is a law of practice. Spacing converts a fixed amount of study into far greater durable knowledge. The slow learner does not binge. The slow learner schedules return visits. The calendar becomes a machine for consolidation. A second tool is retrieval. Testing is not merely assessment, it is training. Active recall forces the mind to reconstruct rather than to recognize. Reconstruction is generative. It creates pathways that allow later access with less friction. A notebook of questions and sparse answers is more instructive than a dense set of highlighted paragraphs. The craft favors prompts that provoke reconstruction. The craft does not hide practice behind easy recognition. It builds muscle by making the mind work. Interleaving is another essential practice. When similar skills are practiced in alternation rather than in blocks, transfer improves. Interleaving introduces desirable difficulty. It forces discrimination. The mind learns to select the right procedure in context rather than to perform by rote. Musicians who alternate scales with phrasing and with sight reading develop flexibility. Engineers who alternate problem types avoid brittle expertise. The slow learner embraces friction because friction creates robustness. Feedback is the lifeblood of craft. Practice without feedback is mere repetition. The artisan listens for the resonance of the tool. The coder runs tests. The scientist consults the data. Feedback narrows error. It is best when timely and specific. Vague praise does not direct revision. Leveled critique, immediate where possible, calibrated to the current stage of skill, accelerates growth. Apprenticeship traditions formalize feedback loops. The master models corrects and praises the marginal improvements that signal durable progress. Deliberate practice remains central because it defines where attention will be spent. The goal is not to practice until tired, but to practice on the edges of competence, the zones where small correction produces large gains. This requires honest diagnosis of weak points and the patience to repeat elementary tasks with mindful variation. The craft of slow learning values repetition that is not mindless. Each iteration is an experiment. Each iteration includes a small hypothesis about improvement. The laboratory is personal and slow. Rituals structure attention into repeatable formats. The morning notebook, the 5-minute warm-up, the evening review, these micro-ceremonies do heavy lifting. Rituals reduce decision overhead. They convert intention into action with lower cognitive cost. A dedicated time and place signals the nervous system. A ritual that pairs sensory cues with task initiation makes focus more likely. The slow learner builds these rituals and maintains them like tools. Externalization matters. Memory is brittle. The external ledger helps carry load. Notes that are organized for retrieval rather than for display are more useful. The index card, the spaced repetition deck, the laboratory notebook, these artifacts make forgetting negotiable. They are the scaffolds that allow questions to persist until curiosity or context provides a path for exploration. The craft treats notes as living objects to be pruned, linked, and re-examined. Reading slowly is itself a craft. It is not the speed of intake that predicts understanding, but the quality of processing. Annotating, paraphrasing, summarizing, testing comprehension, these are forms of active reading. The slow reader asks small tests of a paragraph and then moves forward. A paragraph becomes a unit of practice. The mind learns to hold threads across sections, to detect assumptions, and to model causal claims. Slow reading trains judgment. Teaching is the distillation test. To teach is to compress complexity into explanations that can be validated by performance. When a mind attempts to instruct another, errors and gaps become obvious. Good teachers learn from the questions that fail. Pedagogy for slow learning prioritizes explanation, demonstration, and correction. Socratic methods excel because they force retrieval, argument, and refinement. The classroom becomes a rehearsal space for craft. Culture shapes what kinds of slow learning are supported. Guilds, laboratories, and libraries institutionalize practices that make patient work plausible. Public rituals that praise repair and repetition create social incentive to sustain practice. Conversely, cultures that valorize instant performance and novelty erode patience. The craft is social. It requires community to be sustained at scale. The slow learner seeks out peers, mentors, and archives. Tool design alters the cost of practice. Instruments that make feedback immediate and visible reduce the time between action and correction. Well-engineered practice environments create gentle scaffolds, error signals, and repair options. The clock on a metronome, the visual trace of a waveform, the unit test result, these are forms of immediate evidence. The craft of tool selection thus belongs with the craft of learning. A bad tool amplifies frustration. A good tool makes iteration efficient. Technology invites both opportunity and risk. Algorithmic tutors can, in principle, provide spaced practice, retrieval prompts, and adaptive difficulty. These are desirable features, yet many interfaces prefer novel stimulation to gradual skill building. The design ethic must change. Technology should scaffold the habits of slow learning rather than feed the appetite for instantaneous gratification. Members-based platforms, minimal friction SRS, and privacy-preserving analytics that encourage long-term progress are the design pathways worth supporting. Motivation is not raw force. It is architecture. Intrinsic motivation is not purely private. It is nurtured by environments that afford curiosity, that reduce the cost of small experiments, and that reward the discovery of meaning. The slow learner cultivates micro incentives, small evidence of progress that compound into confidence. The ledger of small wins is not trivial. It is the currency that pays the psychological cost of repetition. Curiosity and humility are companions. Slow learning depends on the willingness to tolerate being wrong repeatedly. Humility reframes errors as informative. Curiosity orients the learner to question rather than to imitate. Together, they rewire preference away from immediate validation and toward long-term competence. The slow craftsman delights in puzzles that yield only after time and attention. Time architecture matters. The day should be arranged to protect deep intervals. Blocks of concentrated work followed by recovery permit the neural resources to refuel. Shorter sessions can be intense if they are focused. Longer sessions require deliberate pacing and interleaved rest. The slow learner treats time as material to be shaped, rather than as something to be consumed. Social support reduces attrition. Communities that practice together create accountability without coercion. Buddy systems, study circles, and apprenticeships supply distributed feedback and moral reinforcement. Shared rituals at the community level multiply the effectiveness of individual practices. When a neighborhood has a public reading hour or a shared makerspace, the social ecology amplifies slow learning. The economy of slow learning requires patience in institutional design. Funding windows must align with the time scales of mastery. Grant cycles that reward immediate deliverables encourage superficial projects. Long horizon funding supports cumulative practice. Academic tenure, apprenticeship stipends, and institutional time banks are mechanisms that can preserve patience at scale. The craft flourishes when institutions accept the reality of slow accumulation. Measurement must be subtle. Metrics that reduce practice to gamified short-term interactions distort. Instead, measurement should track longitudinal markers of competence, transferability, and robustness. A portfolio of performance tasks recorded over months and years provides a more honest account than instant quizzes. Measurement should be used as guide, not as tyrant. It should highlight where repair is needed and where practice is working. Examples illuminate the abstract. Consider the violinist who practices scales with micro variation. The micro variation is deliberate. It addresses intonation, bow pressure, and timing. Each repetition isolates one variable. After thousands of repetitions, the musician attains fluidity. The practice is neither romantic nor magical. It is engineering of the sensorimotor loop. Or consider the scientist who runs small experiments that fail repeatedly. Each failure delivers information. The archive of failed runs becomes a map showing dead ends and promising forks. Expertise in science is as much a history of well-curated failures as it is a record of celebrated successes. The slow learner honors the margin. Marginal gains accumulate. Tiny habits produce significant structural change when compounded. 5 minutes per day of focused practice on a single micro skill transforms capability over months. The arithmetic is simple and it is underrated. The mind is a collection of habits. Small, repeated acts reconfigure those habits into complex abilities. Narrative matters because stories organize time. A life narrated as a sequence of practices becomes more resilient to distraction. The story does not need to be grand. It can be a local tale about the bench, the code base, the studio. The narrating act binds discrete sessions into arcs of meaning. The slow learner writes the ledger and then reads the ledger later to see patterns. Narrative ties the present to past attempts and future intentions. Ethics enters the craft in the distribution of opportunity. Slow learning is not equally accessible. Those burdened by scarcity, by unstable housing, by overwork, have less cognitive bandwidth. Policies that reduce precarity increase the social base for sustained practice. Investment in public libraries, community labs, and time sovereignty expands the democratic potential for deep learning. The craft flourishes when it is permitted to be slow. Creativity benefits because slow learning expands the combinatorial catalog the mind can draw upon. Original ideas typically recombine well-practiced components. The slow learner who has internalized a wide repertoire can notice novel juxtapositions. Paradoxically, speed of novelty depends on the slowness of practice. The most surprising insight often arrives by chance at the intersection of rehearsed skills. Resistance is inevitable. The cultural engines that reward immediacy are powerful. Entertainment economies pay for attention by accelerating novelty. The learner must design counterweights, rituals, peer communities, and deliberate friction in tools protect practice from capture. Defense is not only personal, it is civic. Public policies can create conditions where slowness is possible, and where institutions value depth over spectacle. Repair is an underestimated companion practice. Skills degrade. Practices atrophy. Repair routines that reintroduce prior skills into current projects maintain robustness. The periodic rehearsal of older materials not only preserves competence, it also creates opportunities for reinterpretation because the context of current concerns reshapes the meaning of old knowledge. Repair keeps the catalog usable. A final observation is about joy. Slow learning is demanding, but it is often deeply pleasurable. The pleasure is not the frisson of novelty. It is the quiet joy of craft. It emerges when a practice that once required effort becomes fluent, and then when that fluency forms the basis for new play. The satisfaction of making a thing well, of thinking clearly, of crafting an argument that holds up, these are durable pleasures. They anchor the practice. They provide intrinsic reward that sustains repetition. The craft of slow learning is designable. It requires attention to rhythm and to feedback, to tool choice, to institutional patience, and to social scaffolding. It demands rituals that reduce decision overhead, measurement that guides repair, and policies that extend opportunity. It asks for humility and for curiosity. It rewards perseverance. It widens the range of what a mind can do. Open the notebook and make the first modest mark. That small mark is the first unit of craft. Repeat. Reflect. Repair. Repeat again. Over years, the marks connect into structures that support imagination, judgment, and skilled action. The world of fast answers will continue to expand. The choice for depth remains. The craft of slow learning is the intentional refusal to trade future competence for present convenience. It is an engineering choice about the kind of mind to build, and it is a cultural choice about the kind of society to become.